David, now that we're on the other side of the performance management series, I'd like for us to shift the focus to your executive coaching practice. I know that one of the unique tools that you typically introduce to your clients is the term PDIT, PDIT. Can you speak to that for us?
I found over the years that when I discuss with leaders how they show up in meetings, in formal or informal settings in which decisions are being made or information is shared in one fashion or another, the power dynamic needs to be referenced in some sort of handy way. I introduced this notion of PDIT several years ago, and I'm happy to elaborate. First, the P is power. And what that means simply is who owns the power in the room. And that's a very crude way of stating something that inevitably appears whether someone formally is the most powerful by the organization chart and title, or they simply have the most significant influence in the moment for whatever reason may point to that influence. Who owns the power in the room? Next, who owns the deliverable? In that moment, in that period of time in which people are together and sharing information and working through the challenges of the moment, who owns the deliverable? Who's responsible for reporting out on, say, an update on a project, the status of where we are now, or who's simply responsible to deliver an outcome or have the primary responsibility in the course of that conversation? So, who owns the power? Who owns the deliverable? And then next is importance. I indicate importance from the standpoint of how important is the content. So often, leaders get themselves wound up on matters that may not have that much significance to the moment, to the broader intentions of the organization. Sometimes leaders, unfortunately, talk to hear themselves talk or assert themselves because they feel they have a responsibility to assert themselves, as opposed to providing space for others in the room. How important is the topic of the moment? And then finally, time. And what I mean by that is, what's the time constraint? For instance, if you have a very important topic that needs to be addressed within the hour that the group is together, that's a time constraint and that's a time urgency that points to the fact that the leader in the room, the person who has the greatest power, they may not own the deliverable, but they may set a ground rule at the beginning of the meeting to say, hey, everyone, let's agree that we all need to weigh in on this. Joe owns the deliverable. I want to press for the outcome because Joe and I are going to represent that to the board of directors, and we only have an hour to sort through this. By setting those expectations, there's also space for the leader to be more actively engaged throughout, and that way the expectations established and those in attendance can anticipate that power dynamic is constantly shifting and including the most senior leader in the moment, even if they don't directly own the outcome or the deliverable in this case, they may have a stake, a significant stake. That's PDIT. Who owns the power? Who owns the deliverable? How important is the topic? And what's the time constraint? And I introduced this in my executive coaching sessions as a means of constant reference for leaders based on what they are coming to learn about themselves through stakeholder feedback or what I may be sensing from the work I'm doing with them and how they show up and represent themselves just in the course of our work and other indicators that may be provided to us. PDIT.